Welcome back, Corey Hughes Bloody History. We're going to continue on this Mohrenschildt manuscript. I'm enjoying it, and it seems a lot of other people are too, so we're going to continue. We're going to break it up probably in the next couple days. We'll do something else, but then we're going to continually come back to this. We only have a couple more days of this to go. We're on page 205 of 270, so not too much more to go, a couple more days. This chapter is our move to Haiti. Our move to Haiti ended our personal contacts with the Oswalds, but other contacts were not interrupted, including the strangest one, the posthumous, which I will describe later. Soon after arrival in Port-au-Prince, capital of Haiti, we received a postcard from Lee giving us his new address in New Orleans. At our last meeting for Easter, neither of the Oswalds mentioned that they intended to leave Dallas, so this was a surprise for us. Obviously, they moved from Dallas at about the same time we did, but we do not know. Maybe they were just lonesome. Maybe Lee wanted to remove himself and his family from General Walker's neighborhood. And so Lee gave us this now famous address on Magazine Street in New Orleans, Louisiana, the town where he spent most of his youth. Incidentally, it was written in English. The card got lost somehow, and Jean failed to put the exact address in her book, so she still has under Lee Harvey Oswald's address 214 Neely Street, and the business address of his reproduction company. We did mean to send them a Christmas gift, but the tragic events of November 63 occurred in the meantime. Anytime we look at this address book, we think of Lee and wish he were alive, not only because we liked him so much, but also because he could have proved his innocence, or, if he were involved, to tell the whole truth about the conspiracy. He always had enough integrity to tell us all the truth, even if he had done anything wrong. Remember, he did not deny or accept his guilt in shooting at General Walker. What I had to say here, and it bothered me for a long time that I did not do it before, relates to the type of person that Lee Harvey Oswald was. The reader will have to form his opinion of his guilt or lack thereof. Several new elements will be brought in here, which, in our opinion, are favorable to Lee. Both my wife and I still miss him and are deeply sorry that he met such an untimely death at the hand of such a repulsive individual. And so we led a delightful existence in Haiti, in our beautiful house overlooking the Bay of Port-au-Prince, doing useful work with my international group of geologists, one Italian, one Swiss, and one American, as well as the Haitian helpers. Incidentally, I may have gotten this assignment because there were no Haitian geologists in the whole country at the time. There may have been some in exile. But after November 22nd, 1963, the situation changed for us. Information trickled from the embassy personnel and through Miami papers that I had been Lee Harvey Oswald's best friend, that both Jean and I befriended the assassin of the President of the United States. Of course, we ourselves did tell the political officer at our embassy that indeed we knew Lee and Marina and that we were ready to help in any investigation. We also wrote to our friends about it. All our letters were incidentally intercepted by the FBI. And finally, I wrote a letter of condolences to Jackie Kennedy's mother, whom I had better known than her illustrious daughter. Mrs. Hugh Auchincloss of Washington, D.C., ex-Mrs. Jack Bouvier of New York and Southampton, was dear friends of my in-laws and mine. In this letter, I expressed me grief over the death of a great president and a wonderful man, being influenced by the barrage of one-sided propaganda in the newspapers, on radio, and TV. I added to this letter, I'm deeply sorry I have ever met Lee Harvey Oswald and had befriended him. Living abroad and not having any inside information on the case, we were brainwashed by the media, which emphasized and explained constantly that, indeed, Lee was unquestionably the lone and only assassin. Without any facts and Lee dead, everyone in Haiti considered him the assassin. Even cynical and well-informed European diplomats in Haiti were of the same opinion, but they began to grumble, asking themselves the same question: where is the motive? Now something unusual happened. A gray-suited, bulky Miami and on-tanned with false teeth and an artificial smile, Mr. W. James Wood, an agent of the FBI, arrived in Port-au-Prince for the sole purpose to make me deny a statement I had made to my friends and to the political officer at the embassy. What was this disturbing statement? I had contacted a government man in Dallas, the only one I knew personally, probably a CIA agent, or possibly an agent of the FBI, a very nice fellow by the name of J. Walton Moore. Looks like it's a specialty of these government agents to have a capital letter instead of the first name. Purely Anglo-Saxon, you know. Anyway, Mr. J. Walton Moore had interviewed me upon my return from a government mission to Yugoslavia, and we got along well. He had lived in China, was born there, as a matter of fact, in a missionary family, so I invited him and his wife to the house, and he got along fabulously with Jean. I used to see Mr. Moore occasionally for lunch, a cosmopolitan character, most attractive. A short time after meeting Lee Harvey Oswald, before we became friends, I was a little worried about his opinions and his background, and so I went to see Mr. J. Walton Moore to his office in the same building. I used to have my own office, Reserve Loan Life building on Irvay Street, and asked him point blank, I met this young ex-Marine, Lee Harvey Oswald. Is it safe to associate with him? And Mr. Moore's answer was, he is okay. He's just a harmless lunatic. That he was harmless was good enough for me. I would decide for myself whether Lee was a lunatic. All right, let me just pause right here. Okay, so we have George de Mohrenschildt going to Oswald's place and meeting him with Mr. Orlov. I want to say Count Orlov. It just sounds like he should be a count, right? He's there with Count Orlov, right? And so Orlov is clearly a fucking CIA agent. George de Mohrenschildt is clearly a CIA agent. And he goes here and contacts J. Walton Moore, who's an FBI agent, but also a CIA agent. And he asks his permission. I'm going to rephrase this. I'm going to say that's not what happened. He went and he met with him, and he was ordered by Moore to befriend him. That is most likely the case. Obviously, he's going to ask permission to go and hang out with somebody. Why else would he do this? He knows everybody's intelligence here. He knows what's going on. He knows this guy just got back from the Soviet Union. He knows he's a false defector. He knows he was there at the behest of the agency. George de Mohrenschildt's not a fucking moron. None of these people are idiots. But yet they all seem to admit their associations. Like Kerry Thornley. I'm not CIA, but I just so happen to work for, 3 different CIA agents, and I happen to know these guys, and then this guy introduced me to this CIA agent, but I was never CIA. Give me a fucking break. These guys are all liars. George de Mohrenschildt's a liar. Every single person George de Mohrenschildt has mentioned in this thing has been CIA. From his contacts in Haiti to his people at the bank. These are all CIA agents, right? So he's having meetings about Oswald. And he asked permission. I don't think so. Basically, I think that he was told that he was going to be his point of contact, because they needed to keep in touch with Oswald to see what was going on with him, so he could stay on their radar. Personally, I think he was just being handled, kept away from all the things that were setting him up, like the book depository. And that was the statement which greatly disturbed W. James Wood and his superiors. Let's pull everything on W. James Wood, please. And that same statement disturbed later Albert Jenner, counsel of the Warren Committee, when I gave my testimony. As disturbed Jenner was, and he knew that my testimony was truthful, W. James Wood, who came to see us in Haiti, was more than disturbed. He tried to make me deny this statement, and so we were sitting in a luxurious embassy room, staring with animosity at each other, and this repulsive, replete bureaucrat dared to tell me, "You will have to change your statement." "What do you mean?" I asked incredulously. "That false statement of yours that a government man told you that our president's assassin was a harmless lunatic." "False statement? Man, you are out of your mind," I answered sharply. And so the gray-suited man in no uncertain terms threatened me. "Unless you change your statement, life will be tough for you in the States." Nuts was the only answer I could make. After meeting Mr. W. James Wood, I immediately began having doubts of Lee's guilt. And while I was talking to him, the conversation lasted quite some time. He constantly tried to intimidate me, reminding me a lot of undesirable people I had met in my life, and puritanically challenging me on the grounds of moral turpitude, i.e. too many women. I told this obnoxious FBI agent that either FBI or CIA or any other agency was in any way implicated in the President Kennedy's assassination. I just took a precaution which seemingly backfired, but I did imply that these government agencies were negligent. Still, my statement was of utter importance to the FBI and Mr. Wood, and he kept on trying to force me to deny it. I categorically refused to deny anything, and we ended this stormy session without shaking hands. Then my wife went through the same routine, threats and allusions to her belonging to some leftist organization of scouts, imagine leftist scouts, which marred her background, since she did not have any moral turpitude behavior pattern except her guilt to have been born in China. She answered Mr. Wood in a quite quiet and icy manner and absolutely refused to influence me to change my statement. "You don't seem to like the FBI," said the gray-suited man with the artificial smile at the end of the interview. "I do not like your methods. They are both brutal and naive. Learn from Scotland Yard. They know how to conduct themselves. When they inquire, they do it with discretion, not by innuendo and gossip. You do harm to the people you investigate and don't discover anything useful about the case." A friend of mine in Dallas, an investment banker, told later the Warren Committee investigators that our emotions were probably tensed up during our interview with Mr. Wood. And he was right. The assurance that he was harmless naturally influenced me positively in my relationship with Lee. And still I kept asking him many embarrassing questions like, "How did you get to Russia? It's expensive to travel so far. How did you come back so easily?" His answers were good enough for me. He did not work for any foreign government, nor for our government. The latter is more doubtful. If I thought he did, he would not have been a good friend of mine. On the other hand, after this interview, my opinion of FBI under J. Edgar Hoover, another letter instead of the first name, became very low, and this was confirmed by recent events. Destruction of Lee's letter to the FBI, in which he demanded to leave him and his wife alone. As I mentioned before, the whole Bouvier family were very close friends of mine. I met them upon arrival in the United States. They were very warm, friendly people. The newspapers all over the country made a big issue out of it. A mystery man who was close to Lee Harvey Oswald and to Jackie Kennedy. Some newspapers put forth some odious insinuations. My life seems to be full of such strange coincidences. It's probably in the grave that I shall stop meeting strange people and form peculiar friendships. Even Dr. Francois Duvalier, president of Haiti, got alarmed by all these goings-on. Incidentally, President Duvalier was no friend of John F. Kennedy, who cut down to nothing United States help to Haiti. But there was another factor. My house was located on the same mountainous development as President's Palace, on Taunton Lyle Estates, and the implication was obvious. Living next to the man who befriended a president's assassin presented a problem. A small country like Haiti, government people know more of what was going on in the American embassy than the ambassador himself. The visit of the FBI man was blown completely out of proportion. Americans were scared of me, and even Haitians avoided visiting us. Next section, the Warren Committee. As the atmosphere of Port-au-Prince became oppressive for us and my work was suffering from it, we were considering abandoning my survey, disbanding my small personnel, and returning to the States, but President Duvalier found himself a solution to the situation. He asked Dr. Hervé Boyer, B-O-Y-E-R, Minister of Finance, Secretary of Treasury, and a good friend of mine who had helped me to get the survey contract, to invite me to his office and to have a chat with me. This was a friendly office which I visited often when some problems had to be solved, and the secretary, who was also Boyer's mistress, a gorgeous mulatto girl, was no less amicable to me as usual. But not so Dr. Boyer. He said decisively, "You are in hot water. Everyone is talking about you and your wife. Do not abandon your survey, but go back to the United States and clear your name somehow. If you cannot come back, wind up your work and leave the country." It so happened that on the same day, our embassy received a letter addressed to me and my wife from Mr. J. Lee Rankin, General Counsel of the Warren Committee. Mr. Rankin invited us to come to Washington, D.C. if we wished and to testify. This letter also stated that if we accepted to testify, the Warren Committee would pay all our expenses to Washington and back to Haiti. Of course, we were most anxious to cooperate as much as we could to solve this crime, but Jean refused to travel without our 2 dogs, Manchester Terriers, and after the exchange of wires, Mr. Rankin accepted the additional dog expense. It was unfortunate that Nero and Papia were blissfully unaware that this trip was caused by Lee Harvey Oswald, whom they liked so much. For them, this expedition was a ball. We stayed at the old Willard Hotel, not far from the Veterans Administration Building where the committee was located. I was the first to testify. The man who took my deposition was Albert Jenner, a lawyer from Chicago who much later became well-known in connection with the Watergate case. Jenner was a well-known trial lawyer, and I have to admit that either he was much cleverer than I, or that I was impressed by the whole setting and the situation as it unfolded in Washington at the time. Anyway, Jenner played with me as if I were a baby. Also, people I met there were rather impressive. Alan Dulles, head of the CIA at the time, who did not interfere in the proceedings, but was there as a distant threat. Judge Warren, Alan Dulles was not head of the CIA at the time. Judge Warren himself, a rather sympathetic paternal figure who had a weakness for Marina, we found later. Representatives Gerald Ford, friendly and youthful looking, the last 10 years changed him considerably. And then innumerable hustling lawyers, all of them trying to figure out how a single man, Lee Harvey Oswald, could have done so much damage with his old primitive Italian army rifle. Having around such a galaxy of legal and political talent, you don't have to be tortured. You would be impressed and intimidated to say almost anything about an insignificant dead Marine. And during my lengthy deposition, I said some unkind things about Lee, which I now regret. The reader must imagine my situation, sitting there and answering an endless flow of well-prepared and insidious questions for more than 2 days. Was this an intimidation? We know more about your life than yourself, so answer all my questions truthfully and sincerely, Jenner began. I should have said, if you know everything, why bring us all the way from Haiti? But I did not, and began to talk. And my answers were very nicely edited in the subsequent report. Say the whole truth and nothing but the truth, he intoned. Jenner was a good actor, very cold and aloof at first. He switched to flattery and smiles when he felt that I was getting tensed up and antagonistic. How cosmopolitan you are. How many important people you know. Yes, you are great, said Jenner ingratiatingly, and probably this flattery worked well on me, proving to me that Albert Jenner was such a good friend of mine. So I answered all the questions to the best of my ability with utter sincerity without even asking to have my lawyer present, and he, the sneaky bastard, did not say a word that the whole testimony would be printed and distributed all over the world. And so my private life was shamelessly violated during this time. Jean and the dogs were languishing in the old Willard Hotel. At the end of this long testimony, Jenner seemed convinced that I was not involved in any way in this already solved assassination. He began showering compliments on me, and I felt like a star of a pornographic movie. Before leaving, I told Jenner of the harm this affair was causing me, mainly of the attitude of the American ambassador, of the reflection on my work in Haiti. He inserted, therefore, some nice statements, putting me above all suspicion. Big deal, the harm was already done, and how could I have been suspected of anything, being so far away from Dallas? Unless President Duvalier and I used voodoo practices and inserted needles or shot at a doll resembling President Kennedy. Since everything was known, Jenner concluded my useless testimony with the following words. You did all right. Keep up the life you've been leading. You helped a poor family. And he added as an aside, remember, sometimes it is dangerous to be too generous with your time and help. Then followed 1.5 days of testimony for my wife and our Manchesters. They were not material witnesses, but Jean refused categorically to leave them in the hotel. If our dogs could have talked, their testimonies would have been more valuable than ours. As Jean and I discussed our experiences as witnesses, many details came to mind. For instance, Lee Harvey Oswald must have asked you a question about your political philosophy. What did you say? Asked Jenner slyly. Live and let live, I answered simply. Jenner made some comments on that, but generally seemed satisfied. I said to Jean later it was an unpleasant experience, but in Russia we would have been sent to Siberia for life. She agreed. Jean's opinion regarding our experiences were somewhat different from mine. I was anxious to clear up my name and return to Haiti. I considered it a favor of mine to come and help the committee, she had said. I was completely relaxed. The counsel was pleasant and reserved. However, instead of asking pertinent questions, for instance, when did you meet the Oswalds and how many times you talked to him? And Marina, and about what? Instead, they asked me, where were you born? Who were your parents? I never suspected that my personal life would be broadcast, although I had nothing to be ashamed of. Still, it's my property, my life. The whole report was a wash-up, a cover-up. Later, we shall say whom the Warren Committee tried to cover up, maybe unconsciously. I can never forgive the cheek of asking me how many children I had. Continued recollecting my fiery wife. How many jobs I changed and why. For whom I had worked. How many times I went to Europe on buying trips. How much I earned. I had expected to speak only of Lee and Marina, so I have a grudge, and if I could, I would try to make them pay for the harm and insult they had done to me. Where is the privacy we were supposed to have here? Said Jean bitterly. And I so spoke of my wonderful parents and my life in China, my arrival in the USA, poverty, hard work, success finally. But I hoped that this would be a country free of prejudice, of racial discrimination. Financial opportunities in the U.S. were not the prime reason for my coming here. My faith or lack of faith, all was polluted by this porno exhibitionist questioning. Finally, we began discussing Lee in a desultory manner, concluded Jean. Naturally, our testimonies regarding Lee and Marina coincided. We said the same things in our own ways, and we never even bothered to read our own testimonies. Obviously, everything we said coincided perfectly. When you said truth, you don't have to remember it, so we did not discuss further details. Finally, remembered Jean. They made me identify the gun. Nero, this Manchester, was there. He sniffed at the gun. He could have made a better identification than I. For me, the gun seemed familiar, but whether it was the same when we saw it in the closet, I couldn't say. It seemed to have a telescopic sight, so I told Jenner, ask Marina if she could identify the gun. We both felt that the minds of the members of the Warren Committee were already made up. They were obsessed with the idea that Lee was the sole assassin. The idea of Cuban refugees with a mortal grudge against Kennedy did not interest them. We both were interrogated the same way. Anytime we said anything favorable to Lee, they passed it up, and Jenner Jesuitically kept asking questions which were incriminating to Lee. An amusing detail of Jean's interrogation. Jenner shied away from Nero, and Jean promised that he would not bite, that he would never bite. But he would never bite Lee, a good human being, to which Nero would be willing to swear. We discussed also what we had heard from the committee members. Most other witnesses were nervous and contradicted themselves, probably intimidated by the awesomeness of the proceedings and the fact that many were not even naturalized citizens. And so some good people spoke very unkindly and untruthfully of Lee just because they were frightened and they wanted to please the committee. They really should be forgiven. All the favorable facts we mentioned about Lee were subsequently misinterpreted in the printed edition of the report or not mentioned in it at all. Both of us, we furthermore felt that Jenner was displeased whenever he heard some favorable facts about Lee. Then we asked ourselves, why did the Warren Committee spend all the money bringing us back and forth, keeping us in an expensive hotel, doing all that hellishly expensive investigation around the world about us, even carrying our mutts to Washington and back to Haiti? Why such a waste of the taxpayers' money if they did not want to hear the truth? We discovered that we both told Jenner independently, why don't you send good detectives to New Orleans and to Mexico, find who were Lee's contacts at the time and what he was up to at the time of the tragedy. It seems that the Senate committee is going to do it now in the summer of 1976. We wondered why the committee paid so much attention to the testimonies of people who had known Lee and Marina in Dallas long before the assassination, or others who had known him long before that. And the answer was just to fill up the pages and tranquilize the American populace. Jean dispute with the Mr. Hugh Auchincloss, Jackie Kennedy's mother, in the evening when we finished our deposition. Jean asked her, why don't you, the relatives of our beloved president, you who's so wealthy, why don't you conduct a real investigation as to who was the rat who killed him? But the rat was your friend, Lee Harvey Oswald, was the cold answer. Thus the mind of not only the members of the committee, but of the president family were all made up. Jenner kept asking me constantly, why did the Oswalds like you and didn't like anybody else? As if there was some homosexual link between us. I don't have the slightest idea. Maybe because I liked him. Maybe he liked you because you were a strong person, Jenner asked, again, intimating that there was maybe a wolf or a devil influencing him to do evil. Maybe he identified you as an internationalist, intimating again some dark connection I may have. Maybe, I answered. I'm no admirer of any particular flag. You and your wife were the only ones who remained his friends. Continued Jenner his line of inquiry. This question was asked of both of us, and we answered both in about the same terms. To us, they were warm, open young people responsive to our hospitality. Albert Jenner then brought to my attention part of the letter I wrote to Mrs. Auchincloss from Haiti. He used this as my admission of Lee's guilt. And I explained already under the circumstances this letter was written since we lived in Dallas. We had the misfortune to have met Lee Harvey Oswald and his wife Marina. I do hope that Marina and her children, now she has 2 by Lee, will not suffer too badly through this life. and that the stigma of the assassination will not affect her and the innocent children. This was my foolish letter and my speculation, not Jean's. And again, after the impact of this letter read to me, Jenner very cleverly bamboozled me into a possible motive of Lee's guilt. The only reason for Lee's criminal act, I continued, would be that he might have been jealous of a young, rich, attractive president who had a beautiful wife and was a world figure. Lee was just the opposite. His wife was bitchy and he was a failure. Now, away from the pressures of the committee, I consider this statement of mine most unfair. It would not have made him here to have shot a liberal, a beloved president, especially beloved by the minorities. And Marina was not such a bitch, while Jacqueline was not so beautiful. Especially, she was not beautiful inside when she married that gangster of international shipping, Aristotle Onassis. If you read the Warren Report, there's another leading question by Jenner. As a humanitarian person, you cannot imagine anyone murdering another person. A childish, naive question, of course. I cannot imagine doing it myself, I answered equally stupidly, but at least I did not express the opinion about Lee's guilt. Lee, an ex-Marine trained for organized murder, was capable of killing but for a very strong ideological motive in self-defense. But a few more words about my letter to Mrs. Auchincloss, Mrs. Kennedy's mother. The copies of these letters were given Warren Committee by Allen Dulles, her close friend, as well as the copies of her letters to me. On January 29th, 1964, she wrote to me, "It seems extraordinary that you knew Lee Harvey Oswald and Jacqueline as a child. It certainly is a strange world, and I hope, like you do, that Lee Harvey Oswald's innocent children will not suffer." Very tired by our testimonies, we were invited after our ordeal to the luxurious house of Jacqueline Kennedy's mother and her stepfather, Mr. Hugh Auchincloss. This luxurious home was located in Georgetown, and Auchincloss's money originated of some association of Hugh's family with John D. Rockefeller Sr. of the oil fame. We spoke about another coincidence in our lives. I flew one day from Dallas to Washington, and Mrs. Hugh Auchincloss happened to be on the same plane. She was flying from some health farm in Phoenix, Arizona, where rich women stay on a diet, exercise, and put themselves in an acceptable shape again. This was the year of presidential election, and Mrs. Auchincloss, a staunch Republican, was for Nixon and was sure that her son-in-law, JFK, did not have the slightest chance to win the elections. And he didn't. I, on the other hand, was sure that Kennedy would win the elections and was going to vote Democratic for the first time. I told her that the mood of the country was for her charming son-in-law, and she answered that I did not understand American politics. Eventually, we had to talk sadly about the assassination. Allen Dulles was there also, and he asked me a few astute questions about Lee. One of them I remember. Did Lee have a reason of hating President Kennedy? However, when I answered that he was rather an admirer of the dead president, everyone took my answer with a grain of salt. Again, the overwhelming opinion was that Lee was the sole assassin. I was still thinking of poor Lee, comparing his life with the life of these multimillionaires. I tried to reason to no avail. It seemed to me that I was facing a conspiracy of stubbornness and silence. Finally, both Jean and Janet, Miss Auchincloss, got very emotional, embraced each other, and cried together. One over the loss of her son-in-law, another over the loss of a great president she admired so much. "Janet," I said before leaving, "you are Jack Kennedy's mother-in-law, and I am a complete stranger. I would spend my own money and lots of my time to find out who the real assassins or the conspirators. Don't you want any further investigation? You have infinite resources." "Jack is dead, and nothing will bring him back," replied she decisively. "Since he was a very beloved president, I wouldn't let a stone unturned to make sure that the assassin, if found and punished," implored Jean. "We both have grave doubts in Lee's guilt." Later, we discussed for a long time why a woman so close to President Kennedy, nor Robert Kennedy and the rest of the Kennedy family, as we discover later, would be so adamant on this subject. A later chapter dealing with William Altman's strange adventure will raise further grave doubts in the reader's mind. Would it be possible, as much as it sounds like a sacrilege, that Lee was a convenient assassin to all the relatives and friends of the late President Kennedy? Convenient not in any derogatory sense, but just because he was a patsy not involved in any revenge arising out of JFK's biggest and costliest mistake, the Bay of Pigs. Isn't better to think, maybe subconsciously, that the assassin was a crazy, semi-literate ex-Marine, screwed up Marxist lunatic with an undesirable discharge, a poverty-stricken childhood, unsuccessful in his pursuits both in the USSR and the USA, and with a record of marriage verging on disastrous. It's better to hold this belief for them and for the rest of the country rather than to find out the assassination was a devilishly clever act of revenge caused by the Bay of Pigs disaster. This would explain Lee's desperate scream, "I am a patsy." But we were still in the Auchincloss's luxurious mansion, about ready to leave. "Incidentally, Mrs. Auchincloss coldly, my daughter, Jacqueline, never wants to see you again because you were close to her husband's assassin." "It is her privilege," I answered. Hugh, who was a very silent man, asked me suddenly, "And how Marina is fixed financially?" "I do not know. I just read that she received quite a lot of money from the charitable American people, maybe $80,000. "That won't last her long," he said thoughtfully, and almost without transition pointed to an extraordinary chess set. "This is an early Persian valued at $60,000. We said goodbye amicably to the Auchincloss and drove off back to our hotel. "That son of a gun, Hugh, has an income running into the millions," I told Jean thoughtfully. "Such figures are beyond my comprehension," she said sadly. Next section, our return to Haiti. When we had received Rankin's letter inviting us to come to Washington and testify at the Warren Committee, we knew that we would be of poor help, and as we had been out of contact with Lee for over 8 months prior to the assassination, we could not say what happened to him and Marina after we had left Dallas, but naturally I was anxious to testify in order to clear my name and be able to work on my survey. But the American colony in Port-au-Prince were in an uproar when they were told that we were going to Washington to testify. "How horrible," said some. "Aren't you afraid?" said others. Even my old friend at the embassy, Teddy Black, said, "But he was an assassin, and you were so deeply involved with him. Many thought that we would be put in jail and you would never come back to our lovely house in Port-au-Prince." Fortunately, the Haitian ambassador in Washington was reassured by the Warren Committee that we were decent people. The ambassador transmitted this message to President Duvalier, and we could return safely to Haiti. But my contract became hopelessly harmed by the intervening publicity and by the peculiar attitude taken by the American embassy toward us. And President Duvalier, the astute Papa Doc, knew through his informants that our embassy would not protect my rights anymore. And the old fox was absolutely right. The payments for my survey began drying up in later years, and I never received any cooperation from anyone in our embassy or in the State Department in trying to recover the large balance of my contract still due me. I cannot even give a complete resume of incongruous theories and suppositions which then evolved and are still evolving today in feverish minds of various writers and reporters as a result of my past friendship with Lee, and the colorful excerpts from the Warren Committee depositions which were leaked out. One theory had it that Lee was operated by me via long distance from Haiti to Dallas. Impulses were transmitted very deviously because I, a geologist and famous scientist, had previously inserted a transistor in Lee's skull, either under the skin or deeper, I don't remember. A book was published in New York describing this whole operation in detail, since Papa Doc disliked President Kennedy. He would sit in his office surrounded by, can't read that, Tonbon Makouts, and would operate poor Lee, who would blindly obey us. As a credit to the American reader, I may say that this book did not have much success, and I seldom meet anyone who had bothered to read it. However, another book was published in Luxembourg to avoid criminal prosecution, and it had an enormous success in Europe. L'Amérique Brûlée, American Burns, contains over 400 pages of outrageous innuendos against the American institutions. The writer, James Hepburn, an invented name, is actually a group of European newspapermen who'd been assembling dirt about the United States. This collective, James Hepburn, calls both Lee Harvey Oswald and myself CIA agents. Let me translate this nonsense, which appears on page 356. Oswald was suspected as any other agent returning from a mission in the enemy territory of having been manipulated. He was put, therefore, under surveillance by CIA and then interrogated and tested by one of the specialists utilized at the same time by Washington and by the Houston oil men, whose nom de guerre was George S. de Mohrenschildt, and whose nickname was the Chinaman. This well-informed book, which still has flashes of success in Europe, goes on describing yours truly. The Chinaman was presumed to have been born in the Ukraine and was an expo officer in the Polish cavalry. He was recruited during the war by OSS, Officer of Strategic Services, and was registered in 1944 at the University of Texas, where he obtained a degree of geological engineer specializing in petroleum geology. The CIA used him in Iran, in Egypt, in Indonesia, in Panama, in Guatemala, in Nicaragua, in San Salvador, in Honduras, in Nigeria, in Ghana, in Togo, in Haiti, etc., where he worked in principle for the Sinclair Oil Company. George de Mohrenschildt was closely connected with petroleum circles and member of the Dallas Petroleum Club, of the Abilene Country Club, of the Dallas Society of Petroleum Geologists, and had close personal connections with managers of the following companies: Kerr-McGee Oil Company, Continental Oil, Cogwell Oil Equipment, Texas Eastern Corporation, also with John Meekum of Houston. He was a distinguished and cultured man. Mr. Hepburn obviously buried me already. Who was part of the establishment and frequented the Social Register of New York. His wife, a white Russian lady born in China, worked frequently with him. Another of his covers was the International Cooperation Administration, ICA, in Washington. This, quote, book also accuses Lee of working for a photographic firm in Dallas, a cover for the CIA, which specialized in making and reproducing maps of confidential documents for the United States federal government. Well, that's fucking true. Which part of that is false? Like, none of that is false. None of it. And remember what I said. All of these, anything that sounds like the International Cooperation Administration, that's fucking CIA. Okay, period. But enough of all this nonsense. However, let us remember that all these idiots and distortioners are based on the Warren Report. If I were a CIA agent, I would not have been so miserably treated by the American Embassy in Port-au-Prince, and especially by the ambassador. It is discouraging to say that the Warren Report contained mostly the words which were put in our mouths, so to say. However, there were a few good and truthful facts in this report. For instance, a friend of mine, an investment banker in Dallas, testified that he met Lee and that he found him intelligent and alert. Another young man who had lived in Fort Worth also had some kind words for my friend. All right, next section is effects on our lives. The publication of the Warren Committee report brought an immediate and drastic change in our lives in Haiti. Only the close and true friends understood the real reasons of our involvement with the presumed assassin. In this manner, the phony... Sorry, I'm turning my goddamn fucking phone off because people keep calling me. Only the close and true friends understood the real reasons of our involvement with the presumed assassin of the generally beloved President Kennedy. In this manner, the phony friends were weeded out of our lives, but still too many people, in addition to the publicity caused by the report, were contacted by the FBI agents at various times, asking imbecilic and insulting questions, implying grimly the worst suspicions about us. The same thing happened to Gene. A good friend recalls that an FBI agent asked for the whole day of his precious time just to talk about us. Discussing Jean's background in China, the agent asked our friend, "Is she loyal to the United States?" Our friend answered without hesitation, "Yes, she is, in my opinion." "Whom are you kidding?" said sarcastically the FBI agent. Insulting and stupid articles appeared in the newspaper and in the magazines all over the world, and still do, about Jean and I, calling us mysterious associates of Lee Harvey Oswald. Just a few months ago, Chicago Tribune and San Francisco Chronicle published articles implying that I had received a considerable amount of money in the Bahamas just to keep quiet about the mystery of Kennedy's assassination. A shyster in Washington by the name of Fensterwald assured a European newspaperman, it's Bernard Fensterwald, assured a European newspaperman of similar monetary operation. I should have probably sued the author of such vicious allegations, but this would have added additional publicity. Even a nice and fair book by Gerald Ford, The Portrait of the Assassin, in which he mentions us very favorably, had disastrous effects on our lives. "Oh, you were mentioned in that book about the assassin." Money was offered for interviews, which we refused to accept. Overseas telephone service in Haiti was inadequate. Very few people had private telephones. I happened to be one of the few with the telephone in my office, but not at home. This office telephone kept buzzing for months, and some unknown voices asking me insidious questions. What was your relationship with Oswald? What did you think of him? Did you have the same convictions as he did? Did he kill Kennedy? Why are you hiding in Haiti? Some man called me from Hong Kong just to ask a single question. Who are you? And this was so false because I had been working on my contract in Haiti a year before we met the Oswalds, and we arrived on this island months before all hell broke loose in Dallas. And we were living there without interruption all during this time. And so after a few particularly insisting reporters kept on calling me and spending their EVEIL, whatever the fuck that means, evail money, I would hang up. But the worst was the attitude of the Ambassador Timmons, the charge d'affaires Curtis, and all other sycophants. But more on that subject later. Then came an offer for us to appear on a televised interview for the NBC's Warren Report. The reporter's name was George McMillan, and he asked if he could come all the way to Haiti to visit us. He sounded like an intelligent man and was provided with a good recommendation by a mutual friend. I did not commit myself to a televised interview, but told McMillan that he was welcome to visit us in Haiti. A gruesome incident took place the day of his arrival at the old Port-au-Prince. After a season full of invasions, a group landed from Cuba and made havoc all over eastern Haiti. They were well armed, familiar with the terrain, and murdered indiscriminately. Eventually, all of them were executed by the faithful Tonton Macoutes, TNs as we used to call them. One of the invaders was brought into Port-au-Prince, publicly executed to show the Haitian populace that it wouldn't pay to attack Papa Doc and his government. The dead body was then exhibited on the plaza near the airport with all the supplies and ammunition. The exhibit was attached to the chair, and the swarm of flies around him was like a funeral smoke. When McMillan, an experienced newsman, arrived, he saw commotion and the crowd surrounding the body. I did not want him to see the gruesome and drove around it at full speed without comment. Later in the evening, however, around the drinks, he began to talk about it. Incidentally, when he invited McMillan, we were not sure whether he wanted to talk to us or about Oswald, about the situation in Haiti, which was the center of attention at the time. Since I was in charge of the Geological Survey and the only American working independently in Haiti at that time, I thought that McMillan wanted an interview with me, and I certainly knew the situation well. And it was different from what the American press had described. In my opinion, Dr. Duvalier was an advocate of the poor blacks against the rich, French-educated mulattoes. This was a simplified version of the situation, but better than the full condemnation of the Duvalier regime in Graham Greene's The Comedians. Anyway, I didn't want him to see that dead map attached to the chair without giving him some facts surrounding the execution, what an impact his report would have on the public in the USA if he would start with a statement about the dead body and the flies. We brought McMillan to our house because he seemed as a very pleasant individual. He had told us that he defended blacks' equal rights and that somewhere in the Carolinas where he lived, KKK burned crosses on his lawn and forced him to leave. Anyway, we wanted all our friends who came to visit us in Haiti to know the true facts about the regime, the good and the bad. Later on, when we sat on our terrace to the sounds of the delicate tinkling of analis, small lizards, and looking at the fantastic view of the city and the dark bay, McMillan mused loudly, "Why didn't you want me to see the cadaver?" He stopped suddenly, and a huge tarantula moved slowly along its long legs towards him. He shuddered. "Don't worry," I reassured him. "The big ones are not dangerous. Only the small ones." "Very simple. I didn't want you to see the dead gorilla without telling you the facts surrounding his death first," I explained. "After all, Papa Doc is my employer." But instead of listening to me or even answering, McMillan launched into the diatribe about the great program NBC were prepared about the Warren Report, that we would be the main personalities in it, etc. He even offered to bring in the whole TV crew if we accepted, but sick of all this unwanted publicity, we refused firmly. Fortunately, McMillan turned out to be an interesting and pleasant, a good tennis player. He did not waste his time altogether and was being boycotted by the Americans in Haiti. We're glad to still have us a liberal, independent person. He left Haiti 2 days later, asking us to reconsider our decision and mentioned a substantial fee. I asked several friends for advice regarding this TV matter, and they all answered that remaining silent and invisible would harm us. "You're the only ones who could say a few kind words about Oswald," wrote one of my best friends who had met Lee and wasn't entirely convinced of his guilt. "This national TV appearance would dispel the dangerous aura of mystery in your relationship with Lee," wrote another. And so after battling it back and forth with us, we reconsidered our decision. I called McMillan, and arrangements were made immediately by NBC to bring us and our faithful pooches to New York City. The weather was stormy. We had circled for 2 hours over the city, but the ordeal was over, and we landed safely. NBC reserved for us an apartment at the Plaza Hotel, and the next day we spent the whole afternoon in front of the cameras. And again, as the interview progressed, it became obvious that the producer and Macmillan tried to make me say something derogatory about Lee and to drag out of me insidiously some damaging comment to his memory. To them, he was definitely the assassin, and we possibly conspirators or his secret advisors. As Gene and I were positive in our non-sensational statements, the whole interview did not make any sense. We were invited to New York on wrong premises, that either we would produce some kind of inside information or prove to millions of Americans who would watch the show that Lee was the only assassin. Since the Warren Committee, slanted as it was, could never find any reason in Lee's involvement in the crime of the century, the promoters of the NBC show hoped that I, as his best friend, would finally explain his insane action and that the reason why we were brought into New York. And to Gene and I, who did not have any more information than anyone reading the newspapers and magazines, Lee remained the same person we knew: eccentric, interesting, warm, close friend, and we never considered him seriously as the president's assassin. Of course, insanity is a possibility, but all the previous incidents and conversations with Lee did not suggest impending insanity, nor was he ever to us a poor loser, a stupid high school dropout, a bloodthirsty revolutionary, nor a person jealous of other people's success and money. Such people are met every day on the streets of every American city in groves. This enclosed picture of Lee with the rifle and Marina's inscription would indicate that he might have been considering hunting fascists, and in his mind General Walker was one, but certainly not our President Kennedy. A few days later, while still in New York, we saw a complete 40-minute preview of our appearance, and again we saw what a poor job we did trying to present Lee's side. And later, the worst parts of the 40-minute interview were used for an hour show called The Warren Report, and so many millions saw. It was like a McCarthy era, the time of government's witch hunt against the leftists. This was a general hunt, government and media, against a defenseless dead man. Upon return to Haiti, he knew immediately that something went awry with our relationship with the Haitian government. Usually, we used to go through customs first, cheerfully greeted by Mr. Jolicoeur, Jolicoeur, a clown-like but charming public relations man for Papa Doc. This time, our luggage was searched surreptitiously while militia examined our papers in a different part of the building. When our luggage went out luggage and we went out reunited, when our luggage and ours were reunited, the bulk of the maps and information I had carried with me were stolen. Since they were my property, I lodged a strong protest with our embassy and the Duvalier's cabinet. Both parties laughed at me. What maps? What search? Where were you? How naive can you be? All right. So that does it for that chapter. Tomorrow we're going to pick up right here on page 243 of 270. We might actually get through this tomorrow. I'm going to see if I can't get through this tomorrow. Because it doesn't seem like we have a whole lot more to go. But, all right. So, if you have yet to subscribe to Bloody History World War II, please do so. It's on Substack. It's Substack, bloodyhistory.substack.com. It's been kicking ass. I'll have an episode out later today. And buy the book. If you haven't bought the book, I still got posters available, all kinds of stuff. So that's going to do it for today, and I'll be back tomorrow. Thanks, guys.